All of my content is also posted on 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all of your Magic the Gathering needs, including articles, podcasts, and custom Magic the Gathering tokens and playmats. As a subscriber to my channel, you can use the discount code NEEDSAHONE5 for a 5% discount in their store. You can find the link in the description below. Hello everyone and happy Friday. Friday means it's time for another MTG Top 10. I'm Nighthawk, and this week, and the next few weeks actually, we will be doing some special Magic the Gathering Top 10s in honor of Halloween, one of my favorite holidays. Today, we're going to look at the top 10 vampires in the history of Magic. Vampires are, of course, mythical beings that appear frequently around this time of year, so it seemed fitting. This is one of my lists where I dig back into the archives of top 8 lists to find out which vampires have had the most success at the premier tournament scene. The ranks in this video are all based on which card had the most appearances in the top 8 of premier events. Starting last week, I instituted a new scoring system on these type of top 10s, one that seeks to reflect the fact that Pro Tour top 8s are more difficult to attain than Grand Prix top 8s because they occur less frequently and the competition is more challenging. As always, for each card we discuss, I will present the relevant statistics of the card, such as formats it was played in, what years it was a force in premier events, and so on. First, let's get started with an honorable mention. Honorable mention is Vampire Hexmage. This card doesn't look like much, but once it was printed, people realized it could be comboed in Extended, which is sort of the precursor to Modern in a way. It's a little different, but that's the best way to describe it, with an old card from Cold Snap, Dark Depths, for what amounted to, more or less, an instant win combo as early as turn 2, because you could immediately get your 2020 flying indestructible token. This Hexmage likely would have made it much higher on this list, except that it was almost immediately deemed to be an unfair combo, and as a result Dark Depths was banned, resulting in the Vampire Hexmage not having much time to build up its resume. Like many cards that were banned and extended, Dark Depths was also immediately banned when the Modern format was created. It deserves an honorable mention, though, for being part of one of the most broken decks of all time. The Hexmage is still seeing play in Vintage, indicating just how powerful the combo is. At number 10, we have Malk, Blood Witch. I want to stop right now and say there are a ton of cards with blood in their name on this list, which seems pretty fitting, right? But anyway, Malk, Blood Witch, while she looks like she probably showed up in some sort of tribal vampire strategy, she really didn't. Mostly, Malk, Blood Witch saw play because of the metagame it was in. Path to Exile was one of the most played cards in the Standard that this card was legal in, along with mono-white angels like Baneslayer and Restoration Angel. So the other strong decks of the format, which were Jund control decks, ran this witch in the sideboard as a way of blanking a bunch of the opponent's cards. The Blood Witch's success was very fleeting. She only appeared in all of these top 8s in February and March of 2010, but she did a lot of work out of sideboard in that time, racking up 1 Pro or 2 or top 8 and 3 Grand Prix top 8s. At number 9, we move to a card that looks like it could be a dude at a Halloween party wearing your run-of-the-mill stereotypical vampire costume, Strom Noble. For red-based aggro decks to be a thing in any format, it needs to have at least one powerful 1-drop. That's what Strom Noble was in his day, appearing in a variety of red-based aggro decks in his Standard, whether they were mono-red, Rakdos, or Gruul. Turns out, a lot of creatures are humans, and this guy could get huge in a hurry, all for a pretty low investment of 1 mana. The Noble appeared in multiple Grand Prix top 8s in these decks, peppered throughout his time in Standard. He wasn't dominant, but he was definitely around, even just missing out on a top 8 at Pro Tour Gatecrash. At number 8, we have our second card with blood in its name, Bloodgast. I have to say, when I started doing the research for this list, I knew Bloodgast would be on it, but I'm a bit aghast that he isn't even higher. He sees play in modern dredge decks right now, even showing up in dredge decks in older formats. And while he has been a consistent presence at lower tier tournaments, he's only managed a total of 7 top 8s at top tier events. Bloodgast actually made his premier event debut in a dredge deck, of course, but in the extended version in 2009, picking up 2 top 8s at Pro Tour Austin that year. While the Gast tried to make some appearances in Standard and Black-Red Vampire decks, it never really panned out for him. The Gast isn't lacking for power, though, obviously. Coming out of the graveyard for 0 mana is a big effect, and as a result, he is top 8 at a legacy event, Grand Prix Atlanta in 2012, where he featured in a deck alongside fellow Vampire Blood Artist, as well as the enchantment Goblin Bombardment, in a deck that sought to sacrifice a bunch of creatures to quickly kill the opponent, something that the Gast was good for because you could sacrifice it over and over again. His most recent top 8 was earlier this year in a Modern Pro Tour, where he showed up in a dredge deck. So while the Gast has top 8'd across 3 different formats, he's never done so consistently, and while he sees continued play in Modern and even in Vintage, his resume hasn't been too impressive. Dredge does seem to be pretty strong in Modern right now, with the addition of Prized Amalgam, so he could improve his standings on this list. At number 7, we find our third card out of the first 4 on the list with blood in its name, a card I mentioned just a moment ago, Blood Artist. Blood Artist made a few appearances in the standard of its day, featured in zombie decks alongside recurable creatures like Gravecrawler, and sacrifice outlets like Fellow Vampire, Falcon Wrath Aristocrat, Fume Spitter, and so forth. It also made a few appearances in the Aristocrats decks that sought to sacrifice a ton of creatures and win the game that way, obviously something that the artist had a major role in. It also picked up a top 8 in Legacy in the same zombie bombardment deck I mentioned Bloodgast in. I feel kind of bad for Blood Artist, given that it was a vampire that appeared almost exclusively in decks that focused more on a zombie tribal theme, but hey, 10 top 8s are 10 top 8s. Now we move to number 6, which is one of the most iconic cards from Magic's early history, Sengir Vampire. To us today, the card doesn't look incredible, other than in Limited, where when it is printed it is still pretty strong, but in its day, 5 mana for a 4/4 flyer that could get bigger if you had to chump block it was real power. Remember, it was going up against Sarah Angel, who had comparable stats and was considered by many the best creature of the time. The power of the card is reflected in the fact that it scored so many Pro Tour top 8s in the early history of the game, appearing primarily as a win condition in black-based control decks. It still makes a list like this, despite the fact that Grand Prix did not exist in that early stage of the game, putting the card at a bit of a disadvantage. His heyday was definitely only in the early days of Magic, and it is unlikely he will ever make another Pro Tour top 8. The bottom part of this list was a bit of a dogfight, with several cards within just a few points of each other, but the remainder of the list takes a big jump from here, with all of them having at least 22 points. Let's take a look at this first card with 22 points. At number 5, we have Vampire Nighthawk. It is fairly fitting that it appear after Sengir Vampire, because the Nighthawk heralded a new era in the strength of creatures, especially for what you could do with 3 mana. 3 mana for everything this guy could do was ridiculous at the time, and even now he's pretty impressive. Being an evasive threat that could swing a race by 4 damage every time it connected thanks to lifelink, while also being capable of trading for anything thanks to Death Touch, this guy was the full package. He was capable of appearing in basically any deck in the standard that he existed in. This included more controlling decks like Jund, which ran him as a win condition and a way to protect themselves, and aggressive vampire-based decks, as well as aggro decks with no tribal theme like Rakdos Aggro. Following a trend of many vampires on this list, he also appeared alongside decks that were otherwise zombie-centric, indicating just how strong he was. He even managed to pick up a random top 8 and extended in a fairy tribal deck, but for the most part, the Nighthawk has not made any impressive appearances since he rotated out of Standard. In addition to being ridiculous and constructed, he was also the consensus best uncommon in Triple Zendikar draft, where it was right to take him even over most of the rares. The format had very little in the way of removal that could deal with more than 2 toughness, so he thrived there, appearing in a lot of winning decks. At number 4, we have Falcon Wrath Aristocrat. This card is pretty strong. For 4 mana, you get a 4/1 with Flying and Haste, which is a decent rate, but what pushed the card over the top was its second ability. It could become indestructible at the cost of only 1 creature, usually an expendable creature in the format it existed in. In Block and Standard, this meant it could eat things like Gravecrawler. And this picked up many of its top 8s in Block and Standard, and could eat tokens and so forth to become indestructible, as well as Gravecrawlers. This made the Aristocrat incredibly difficult to deal with, as she chipped away at your life in the air. She appeared in many of the same decks that Vampire Nighthawk did, although she appeared in basically no control decks for obvious reasons. They were in many aggro decks together, and the Aristocrat appeared in even more aggro decks than the Nighthawk did, ranging from Jund to red-black aggro. The Aristocrat also appeared in deck lists alongside another card on this list, Blood Artist. Remember the Aristocrats deck I mentioned when discussing the Blood Artist? Well, it takes its name from this Aristocrat, as well as another one in the deck, but I think this one is probably more important, who could be used to kill the opponent quickly, since it could sacrifice creatures for free, drain the opponent's life with Blood Artist, and hit the opponent hard in the air. The Aristocrat hasn't been anywhere near top 8 since she rotated, but she was a card to be feared when she was in Standard. At number 3, we encounter the 4th and final vampire with blood in its name on the list, Blood Baron of Scopa. Remember how Sengir Vampire was a 5 mana 4/4 with a bunch of relevant text on it? Well, Blood Baron of Scopa makes him look like a vampire bat. While you have to dip into white to play him, you get lifelink and protection from 2 relevant colors that have very strong removal. Not only that, he also gets absolutely huge and gains flying and becomes a 10/10 flyer if you get to 30 life, which he can do on his own without too much trouble. He appeared in 3 of the top 8 decks in the Pro Tour in which he was first legal. It was a block Pro Tour Dragon's Maze in 2013, and he appeared in 3 different control decks that ran him as one of their win conditions. He also showed up in standard Reanimator decks, but his main home when he was in standard was in aggro decks, especially control decks rather, especially Esper Control, where it made most of its appearances, but it also enjoyed high finishes in Orzhov control decks and in Devotion to Black decks. He has never made an appearance outside of Blocker Standard, but he was a card that defined the format to some extent when he was around. At number 2, we have a card that is still legal in Standard right now, the only one on this list, and that is Cletus, Trader of Get. This guy is just absolutely bonkers and gives an insane amount of value for only 4 mana. A 3/4 with lifelink who gives you a 2/2 zombie every time one of your opponent's creatures dies. That's already pretty insane, especially in control decks that run a lot of removal. But on top of that, he can eat those zombies, and also other vampires if you happen to have them, but most of the decks that run this don't usually have them. But he can eat these zombies to get big enough to crash through your opponent's biggest creatures and win you the game on the ground. Ever since he was printed, Cletus has been appearing in control decks in Standard. While he did slow down a bit with the printing of Reflector Mage, a card that punishes you for tapping out on turn 4 for a creature that doesn't immediately impact the board, he still has been making appearances, although at a lower rate. But I don't think he's done building his resume yet. He even has an outside shot, I think, at appearing in Modern at some point, as strong as he is. Now we move to our number 1, the best vampire in all of the history of Magic, Olivia Voldaren. While the new Olivia from Shadows over Innistrad got a lot of buzz, she mostly flamed out. This Olivia lived up to the hype and is insanely powerful. At her best in control decks that can dump mana into her in the late game, Olivia is capable of many things, not only killing creatures with damage, but also making herself larger when she does just 1 damage to them. So each 1 in a red you pay, she makes herself bigger at instant speed, making combat a real nightmare. Not only that, though, her ability very flavorfully transforms the creature she bites into a vampire, meaning her second ability, the ability to steal a vampire, becomes relevant. Her first ability permanently transforms creatures into vampires, it's worth noting, meaning you don't have to spend 7 mana all at once to steal a creature. Olivia was a dominant card when she was in Standard, and has even found her way into modern Jund decks because she is so powerful. She has not gone a calendar year without getting at least 1 Grand Prix or Pro Tour Top 8 since she was printed. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. For the next 2 weeks, I will be continuing with more Halloween-inspired MTG Top 10s, so if you want to make sure you catch those and other great MTG content, don't forget to subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, and if you have any questions or comments, ideas for future Top 10s, post them below. Thanks for watching.